First of all, hello everyone, and welcome to the Comms Major podcast. I'm really excited about today. We're joined by Darian Kovacs, who is an Indigenous business leader with over 15 years of experience in marketing, communications, and public relations. We're interviewing Darian today in honor of National Indigenous History Month here in Canada, and we are going to jump right into it. Darian, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Really love that you have this show. It's really cool.
Of course. So Darian, you and I have known each other for a while. We are practically neighbors. But for our listeners who may not know your story, can you share a little bit more about how you got into marketing and communications? And growing up, did you actually see anyone who looked like you in the industry?
Yeah, I can kind of talk about my origin story. So started off born in Edmonton, grew up in Spruce Grove till I was little, and then moved to Tawasin or Sawasin, it's sometimes pronounced. Um, I went did all my kind of junior high school there. Went to UVic to study visual arts to be like a painter or a drawer of some sort. And then discovered child youth care. And then went and spent years working in like curriculum writing and um, did event management, did a bunch more youth work stuff, and then worked a bunch in software uh, stuff. And then eventually I realized that I love the idea of how do we help organizations understand how to use the internet and social media and digital ads, but also connect it and relate it to public relations. So, because every part of the jobs I had, and even volunteering in high school, every part of that touched PR.
Hmm.
I tell this story even when I was in junior high. There was a woman named Almira Bardai who was doing some work with ICBC on this leadership conference. I volunteered there, and it was my first exposure to like the power of PR. Her and her twin sister Jobina were kind of running this volunteer-led kind of teenage group that kind of was doing that. And it was so cool to see like the minute you can get something in the media or the press, the story that happens and the power that happens when you can get someone else to tell your story. Um, yeah, and growing up, I think all through my work, I think where I mostly was most shocked by was I just kind of was head down, running jelly and kind of doing the work. And we were out in Abbotsford originally, is where we set up our office. Um, and it was just normal to have an office. It was just normal to be an office of kind of all sorts of people from different backgrounds and different perspectives and different um, kind of ways of life. And I remember I was kind of like we were running this podcast called Marketing Jam. We then called it Marketing News Canada. We then launched this website for it. We thought it'd be fun to do like, hey, let's do like a national marketing award, and we thought it'd be a neat thing to do. And as any good marketer does, you go to market and kind of look at the competition and kind of know thy enemy, or keep your friends closer, enemies closer, whatever way you look at it, or market research. And we realized at the time, every marketing award in Canada, every advertising award, every communications award, every jury um, only included, never included anyone outside of only like Caucasian people. Were only included on juries. And I was a bit shocked, and I was like, this can't be right. So we like double checked the research, we checked again, and again, the majority of them were also men. So over 70% men, 100% white. And I remember just being so shocked. And so we set up this award, and we just were like, well, let's just be normal and make a jury that's like both men and women, and have people from different perspectives and all sorts of different vantage points. And also even the majority of winners. And again, just because of just the inevitable people who were on the jury and who was being nominated, it was typically majority were only ever white winners. Um, and so we just, it was probably the big shock for me when I thought, like, we're part of this like beautiful, artistic, creative industry. Obviously, we're going to be like all about diversity, diversity of perspectives and diversity of thoughts. But I did not realize I was part of an industry that was like just as, call it vanilla in its attempts to kind of homogenize as many others, which was really, really sad for me. And at the same time, and similar, that next year, Vancouverite named Ryan Reynolds had an ad agency, and he saw a similar thing in the US, mostly in the kind of the film production world. And so he invested in a group called Creative Ladder to help more Black individuals break into the advertising space. And so it was confirming to see it wasn't just a Canadian thing, it wasn't just an American thing, but it was kind of all over the world. Our industry was, again, predominantly led by and kind of at the helms was mostly a white leadership.
Wow, I mean, there's so much to unpack there, Darian. Thank you for sharing. And it is obviously quite shocking to me because I never heard that story before. And I think maybe sometimes we just don't think about these things, right? Which is why I really appreciate you coming on the show and bringing that awareness. What you said was, I think, is a perfect segue to our second question, which is has to do with your podcast that you had, the Marketing News Canada podcast. And I was listening to your show from 5 years ago. You had
Yeah.
an episode, an Indigenous panel episode, which I found really informative. And the conversation was really touched on kind of what you said, representation in the industry, but also in advertising in general. Now, looking back 5 years, ago, do you think things have changed or improved? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and you made this great comment where it's like maybe some people haven't thought about it before. But the wild thing was like I remember after, BLM movement, right? And people realizing, hearing about the acronyms that are out there, BIPOC and all these things, like a major Canadian association of communications ran a conference and only had white speakers, white panel members, white keynotes. And I was just like, I don't know if, it's one thing to think about it, but it's another thing to just like actually pause. Um, and again, the organization, the other awards show, even after we kind of showed that it was possible, because I think often the excuse we get, and this happened with another marketing organization, where they asked if I would come and be a mentor with this program that they were running. And I said, hey, by the way, do you have any Indigenous mentees? Like that'd be really great. And if you want to connect. And I go, oh, we don't actually know any Indigenous folks in marketing and advertising. And I think that just gave me some empathy for a group of folks who like, well, if they don't know anyone, if they grew up in a world, or they grew up in a world where they didn't know folks. So obviously when they recruit other jury members or recruit folks or they get folks nominated, they're going to recruit people who are like them and that they're comfortable with. And so, um, yeah, you asked the question, has it changed in 5 years? I'd say it was like a slow, like kind of like the needle is slowly moving. There's an amazing organization called POCAM, which continues to be more awesome and stronger and putting out incredible data and resources and getting organizations to commit to like looking at the diversity of their staff, looking at the inclusion of voices at the leadership table. And so what POCAM has done just with their ads and strategy magazine, with the data that they're putting out, they're creating cause for pause as far as what our industry is doing and are we giving voice and perspectives to the diversity of our amazing country.
I love that cause for pause. And yeah, I think there's so much, I'm not originally from here, from Canada, but one of the things I really appreciate about Canada being such a diverse country. And I always found people to be very open and, relatable. But I think that, like you said, maybe we don't think about these things, but maybe if we can teach the next generation of practitioners or make them more aware, things could change. So on that note, do you, based on what also you own, Delhi Academy, how can what do you see between what, practitioners or like students in comms majors are learning, what they should be learning about this important topic? What's the gap?
Yeah, I think the big one, it starts even younger than that. I'd say like, hey, when you look at like early reading learner books, right? Like that, like I want to, and it's often like, I want to be a doctor. What does it mean to have this career, that career? The careers that you're impressed upon when you are like grades 5, 6 are often the careers that that's kind of in your frame of mind of what I could be when I'm older. So I think if there's ways that we can address it at that young level to make advertising, marketing a key part of the career options when they're in that younger age. I think that's really crucial, especially for those that maybe have not thought of that. They didn't have an uncle or an aunt or a relative who was in that industry. So the more we can actually open people's eyes to like this amazing job that is based around storytelling. Like we are professional storytellers. And who better to tell those stories than, indigenous communities and folks who grew up with stories and with story being such a key part of how they learned. And so I think that's where there's a great opportunity, I think, to kind of raise awareness about this job. And then also, I think what we did with Jelly Academy was say, hey, how do we rapidly reskill, but also rapidly certify professional marketers? So don't just give them a, kind of a 4-year program that's like light and fluffy and, kind of soft, but how do we give them like a 12-week intensive that allows them to get all their Google certificates, their SEMrush certificate, their all those certificates that can prove that they know what they know. In the same way you look at an electrician with their tickets, you look at folks who have their Red Seal certificates, you look at accountants who have to, get their CPA. How do we look at marketers as like a professional, certifiable organization that has certifications that can verify that they know analytics, that they understand, Google AdWords, and so that's why we partner really closely with Google and Meta on all their certifications, so that uh, learners and students, and actually they already employed, can prove that they know what they know what they know.
Totally. And, I was just reading a report today on career readiness, and you're absolutely spot on because employers are looking for students and recent grads who can show what they're doing, their skills, and demonstrate them, not just talk about them. So I think, certifications really can add a lot of credibility, especially industry ones. And on that note, is there something in this space that students can do? How can students and new communicators become more familiar with Indigenous communities or kind of incorporate that into their work? Is there something they can show, demonstrate for that knowledge?
Yeah, I think one of the greatest things is that, everyone is living on land um, that has an origin story. And much like you and I have an origin story of where we came from, where we were born, where we came from. So there's an amazing resource, and I'll put in the chat, which again we can put in the show notes, called Whose Land. And it actually goes right down to whatever postal code you're at, whatever, wherever you're at. It's just a great resource. If you're ever going to, maybe you've seen this, if you're watching an online presentation, maybe you've seen them use Whose Land as like the land acknowledgement tool, because people are coming from all over for a webinar. So step one, learn what land that you're on. Step two, find the First Nation that's part of that area. So where I am, it's Kwantlen First Nations. So maybe reach out and say, hey, do you offer any workshops? Do you offer any, do you do any events? Are you running a powwow? So we have a powwow that happens every year. You can go out to it. You can volunteer at it. You can find out if there's Indigenous businesses in your area. We have like a really amazing cafe where they serve bannock and different, you know, jams and amazing things. So you can go out and learn that. When you're traveling, there's amazing Indigenous tourism experiences. So in BC, where I am, ITBC is a great resource. So if you're up at Whistler, there's an amazing museum experience that you can go through. Um, Being able to learn where you are and what's around you, and who was there before and whose land it is, goes beyond that land acknowledgement. But like, and that there's never been a better time to be able to actually like physically, with your taste and your smell and your hands and your feet, you can go and experience. They call it the original, right? So like the OGs of our country, the OGs of your city, they're a lot easier to find than you would imagine.
Well, there's lots of resources. Thank you so much for sharing. We'll definitely share these in the show notes. And what I really liked about what you shared, Darren, is that it's very experiential as well. Nowadays, like you said, you can experience this culture, you can ex go to the museum, and it's not just learning about it in the classroom. You can really extend beyond it. And maybe after you can talk about it and bring it back to your LinkedIn or, to some other, tell a story. Like you said, we're storytellers and demonstrate that storytelling for prospective employers. Um, on that note, can you think of a campaign or a project that got Indigenous community engagement right? And what could we learn from it?
Yeah, and I'm going to share one more resource. Bob Joseph did a series of books, 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act.
Hmm.
His books and resources are amazing. It's short, it's simple, it's accessible, and just kind of is very, very educational. And again, to expand also on just in your local community, you probably also have a local Métis chartered community or a Métis nation as well. Not in every province, but in most of the provinces, BC, Alberta, Northwest Territories, Manitoba, Ontario, Saskatchewan, you can find them. not just on the provincial level, but on a local level. And they're often doing a lot of flower bead work. They're a different sort of nation that would have different perspectives and kind of cultural and artistic acts. But a campaign that did it right, and this goes back. This was on the panel we talked about 5 years ago when people talk about, hey, have you ever seen yourself in work or in a campaign? Sephora it probably continues to be they were the first to ever have Indigenous models, and they didn't make a big thing of it. They didn't make a big show of it. They did it before it was ever a thing. So I just want to give a huge shout out to Sephora for just always included Indigenous representation in their models and perspectives. They were quick to bring on Cheekbone Beauty into their stores. Cheekbone Beauty continues to do amazing campaigns. Their one that they did with Sid Lee about kind of the story and the perspective of Indigenous folks. They did an amazing video kind of telling her story and kind of writing the story. If you get a chance to look that up, Cheekbone Beauty, Sid Lee campaign was gorgeous. The stuff that Indigenous Tourism Alberta puts out like continues. I love every time they put out videos or work. ITBC, when they talk about kind of some of their members, just such beautiful storytelling and videos. Um, those would be just a few. There's so many out there. But I also love it where, folks just they make it normal that they've included Indigenous folks in their campaigns. And the other piece being they didn't just include First Nations perspectives, but they've also included Métis perspectives. They've included Inuit perspectives because we live in a country with three major nations under the big Indigenous umbrella. For those that don't know, and we're talking marketing, so the parent brand being Indigenous and the sub brands being First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. And so being able to have views and perspectives and voices from all three is always a beautiful thing to see.
Well, perfect. That was kind of going to be my next question, but you kind of answered it already. That's perfect. Thanks for sharing all these resources. We're definitely going to be sharing them more in the show notes. One of the things that we talked about a lot is today's storytelling. Now from a brand's perspective, but origin story founders, Indigenous founders, what are some of the opportunities for Indigenous businesses and founders to tell their stories as a way to obviously entertain, share, but also educate non-Indigenous communities, like you said about the different cultures, the different groups and communities.
Yeah, I think one thing that we've done, and I've done this with a few groups now, where I've gone in where they're like, "Hey, come and give a perspective," and they try to just bring me in, and I often have to again educate and explain, well, hey, I'm one perspective. I have a Métis perspective. Um, that's one of the three major groups. And even say, I'm in BC, but even if you bring in a First Nations person from BC, they're going to have a different perspective than a First Nations person in Ontario. And so being able to just educate folks and saying, hey, at least if you're going to educate your team, your marketing team, your communications team, get all three perspectives. Make sure that you don't just think one person can cover them all. It's like saying to someone who's happens to be Chinese to be like, hey, can you come in and explain all Asian culture to my team? Right. So you expect the Chinese person to know everything about Japanese, Thai, Korean culture. Um, and I think we're almost there. I think we're maybe 5 years out. I'm giving it 5 years, another 5 years before people realize, okay, there is a difference between these different, Indigenous groups. It looks different geographically. Um, and um, and they have so much to offer. And I think the thing that I love about the Cheekbone Beauty story is like it tells the story through their advertisement that it isn't about what you see and hear in the news. Indigenous people aren't just that kind of stereotypical reputational piece around like, oh, woe is the Indigenous person. It flips the story around to say like, these are powerful matriarchs. These are powerful storytellers. These are incredible folks who have been here and survived and thrived through all these years, through colonialism, through all the experiences they had that were residential schools, through the negative pieces that tried to take them down. Um, the story of Louis Riel and the resistance and the way that they've come back is just a beautiful story in and of that self. So being able to see that and hear that and celebrate that, I just think is a great opportunity that we have. Uh, Coming in the years to come. And I think we'll continue to see that thrive.
No, absolutely. And when you said 5 years, I was like, well, we got to do this podcast again 5 years from now if
Yeah,
we still
yeah.
have it
No, it's
and
great.
compare notes and see, here's what you said 5 years ago. Is it better? And I love the idea of, again, when I was doing my research again, there's obviously 630 First Nations alone, not including Métis and Inuit. So, like you said, we can't put them all into the same group. And I love the analogy you gave about, the Chinese person having to explain Asian culture. So, I think that's really important to keep in mind in terms of representation, both within, the people we work with and then the work we put out there in terms of campaigns and stories. And I think that's a really profound message. We've got a few minutes left, and I want to ask you, Darian, you've done so many different things, just from your origin story to the things I learned about you doing this podcast. What is the best career advice you ever received you'd like to pass on to our listeners?
Yeah, I had a guy tell me, John Bromley, he told me like make yourself indispensable, right? And you'll become indispensable. And it doesn't always work, but it was just this cool advice to say, hey, if you show up and meet practical needs each day, you're going to be practically needed and helpful. And I really, really liked that advice. It was good. It got me to kind of again think about, chew on, and realize, okay, how do I show up each day to this office? What's my role? What am I here to do? Um, and how do I make myself useful to the people around me and serve people's needs? And where are the needs that are there? And can I serve that need?
I love that. And especially now with AI, making yourself indispensable is so important. Like you said, not easy, but I think being aware and starting with being practical. What is one thing that someone listening can do right away? You talked about kind of finding out, going to your land, doing the land acknowledge, not just doing the land acknowledgement, but just, finding out the land you're on, its story, and connecting from there. Is that kind of the next step, or when can someone start?
Yeah, that's a great start. Picking up maybe Bob Joseph's book, because then you can educate yourself. And I think, yeah, check out a powwow, get to know someone. Again, my hope is, again, we're 5 years from now, the folks like myself who have Indigenous agencies, we're no longer needed for groups that want us and want our perspective on their campaigns because they have Indigenous folks sitting, they're at the water cooler, they're at the desk next to theirs, they're on Slack channel with them, they're on a Teams chat with them because we have done the work to um, find out ways we can get more Indigenous young people into the marketing and communications role. If you have ever a chance, whether it's to go on reserve or to go to a rural high school or a rural elementary school or any sort of high school, elementary school to talk about the job you have and how amazing working in comms and marketing is, please do it. Not just for the Indigenous folks in the room who are going to hear it, but for everyone in the room to hear it, to continue to see how amazing our jobs are, how important our jobs are, and you might inspire that young person who maybe have never thought of becoming a marketing professional. That might just inspire them to be that one day.
Well, thank you so much for inspiring us today, for uplifting us. We know your schedule is very packed. So thank you for bringing your perspective today, Darian. And hopefully we'll talk before 5 years from today.
Yeah, that would be lovely. That would be lovely.
All right. Well, I will let you go and enjoy the beautiful sunshine, and we'll talk to you
Thank you.
soon. Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
Darian. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.